On his first full day as pontiff, Pope Leo XIV holding a mass for cardinals at the Sistine Chapel this Friday. Tom Heneghan joining us on the set. He's a parish correspondent of the Catholic Weekly, The Tablet. Hello to you, Tom. We had the reaction on Thursday. Surprise about the American Pope, a lot of questions about will there be continuity between him and Francis. Now the dust has settled. We've read a lot of different articles. Where do you lie on this? What do we expect from Pope Leo XIV?
Well, given what he said yesterday, last night on the balcony, we already see he's in the footsteps of Francis. He echoed Francis with several of the key words that were used in Francis's speeches. Things like walking together. That's very important because I haven't said that before. Francis said that again and again during his sermon in 2013 when he was elected Pope. The walking together means synodality. And the synodality, we had 2 years of synodality talks. And basically on his deathbed, the Pope said, we're going to have 3 more years of that.
And for our viewers, can you explain synodality?
I was about to do that. Synodality comes from Greek, and it means walk together. It's the together path, or whatever. And so what it really means is a more decentralized church, a church that listens to people from below. That was very much a topic of Francis's papacy. And we'll see a version of that under Leo. It'll be a bit more conservative. It'll be a bit more predictable. Francis sometimes was a bit unpredictable and erratic. But what is very good is that he's echoing Francis. He also took the name of Leo XIV. The name is very important because Leo XIV was the first pope who tried to bring the Catholic Church into the modern world. That was in the 1880s and 1890s. 1892 is his most famous encyclical, it's called, a writing called Rerum Novarum, where he spoke about workers' rights and trade unions and human dignity and things like that. And he condemned both socialism at the time, which was almost communism, and unbridled capitalism, because the Catholic Church likes a both-and approach, whereas politicians take the either-or very often, especially now. So he gave all the hints that he's going in that direction, but he also, through his clothes, he was more dressed like a pope when Francis came out onto the balcony.
That's a departure from how we saw Francis.
Right. Francis was radically different, and he changed the style of the papacy. It'll be very interesting to know, is he going to live in the Apostolic Palace again, or is he going to live in Casa Santa Marta like Francis did? Is he going to take a Fiat or a Mercedes? Things like that.
Right.
But he gave that hint yesterday. Today, I'm watching his sermon this morning. He should give more indications of which way they're going. Sometimes it might take months to actually see something. For example, Pope Francis's famous quote, "Who am I to judge?" That came 5 months after he became Pope.
But we had a feeling when he first met the press, didn't he? When Pope Francis first met the press.
Oh, you could feel it right away. Right. You could feel it as soon as he came out, because he didn't have all the papal clothes on. He just had the normal white, which is for the Pope. And he just opened up with "Buonasera," good evening.
So when we hear Pope Leo talk about being a bridge, is that between traditionalists and progressives within the Catholic Church?
Yes, he wants to forge a middle road, but his priorities are definitely more like Francis than like a lot of the conservatives who were running. And there were some ultra-conservatives. There was a whole campaign by especially rich American laymen to push the names of very conservative candidates and to put black marks on the records of centrist and liberal candidates.
Oh, we heard some detractors in America calling him a Marxist, Pope Leo XIV.
Yeah, well, that's the a conspiracy theorist who's very close to Mr. Trump.
Unfortunately.
But no, he's not a Marxist. He's definitely not a Marxist. But the Catholic view is different from the politician's view. And so he's bound to come into a clash with them at some point. He will do it with, more rounded phrases and, a bit more diplomacy than Francis did it. But I think he's also somebody who's quite experienced, so he can stand up to people, which he did to J.D. Vance. When J.D. Vance said, oh, you have different levels of love for your neighbor and for other people, etc., and he quoted St. Augustine, Leo was an Augustinian, and he was the head of the Augustinians for 12 years, and he immediately shot back on X, former Twitter, saying, no, you're wrong. That's not the way it is. You respect everybody's dignity. That's the way the Catholic Church teaches. And so this whole migrant story, Francis, his first visit was to Lampedusa, where he honored people who had died trying to cross the Mediterranean in leaky boats.
Yeah, so much of what the Pope says perhaps might be a little bit predictable. What is unpredictable is about where the Pope goes. And so it'll be very interesting to see what Pope Leo's first visit will be.
You're so right, because once you become Pope, well, there's nothing higher except God. So we thought, like, Bergoglio was seen, some people said, oh, he's an old reactionary, and there were also attempts to put black spots on his record as well. We don't know. Maybe once he's in the office, he will become more outgoing. He's a bit shy as a personality, but maybe he'll become more outgoing. We don't know. And that's for us to watch and see now. But it will take a while. He is giving hints now, but it might take 6 months before we know this or that. He hasn't spoken much about the hot-button issues, like women's ordination or blessing LGBT marriages. You can bless the people involved individually. That Pope Francis, he went that far. But to say unions, marriages, then it's like saying, no, we're changing the doctrine about homosexuality, which Francis didn't change doctrines. He only changed style. Mm-hmm. But even then, that was so big that he has this reputation as a reformer, which was only half true because he didn't change any doctrine.
Right. And we hate to paint by broad strokes here, but when we talk about the Catholic Church, we're talking about 1.4 billion people. Yeah. And when we talk about traditionalists and progressives, it makes it sound very polarized. So when we call Leo a moderate, is there a majority that are moderate, or are they polarized and the center is a minority?
There is definitely a polarization on the edges. Mm-hmm. But there is a large middle ground, which came out, for example, he was elected for only five voting rounds. That's quick enough.
Tom, take us through the images we're seeing right now. It looks like that Mass is about to begin at the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, they're walking in now here with all the priests, and there he is.
Tom, turn towards me so we can hear you on the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there he is. There, I can look at him. He'll walk in, and this is a Mass. First of all, giving thanks. It's his first Mass, and he's thanking the electors for the election. So they're all there, and then, like I say, during the sermon, that's the most important part that we want to watch, because he will give some hints, a bit more than last night, about where he actually wants to go.
Because last night when we heard him speak on the balcony at St. Peter's, we were talking about how carefully crafted that message was. He probably had about an hour to prepare it. This is a much more important occasion. This is the occasion where you say he'll give indications of what's to come.
Yeah, but maybe not too many. We don't know.
Right.
That's the problem. With a lot of this, because it's not a democracy, because there is very little transparency in this whole procedure, and because the Pope, as the Pope, can answer the question or not, can avoid a question if he wants to, you have to remember that the papacy is modeled on Renaissance monarchy. It's not modeled on anything democratic. So to think about it in those terms is the wrong way of thinking about it.
And do we know what language will be doing this in?
No, I don't
Have
know.
a polyglot on our hands.
He would, first of all, he would say the Mass probably in Latin, because that's the Church's official language. That's also the universal language. Like when you're in St. Peter's Square and you attend a papal Mass, it's in Latin, and everybody knows, every Catholic knows, this is coming up, this is what you say. Sometimes they know the words, sometimes they don't, but they can recognize it, they know what it is. It would be nice if he spoke some English this time, because we haven't heard him speak English. First of all, he's the Bishop of Rome, so of course he speaks Italian.
Right.
And he spoke very good Italian last night, so you could see that was no problem.
He's fluent in Spanish.
And then because he spoke to the people from his former diocese of Chiclayo. Yeah, in northern.
We are not fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, no,
apparently.
we're not fluent in Spanish. But he didn't speak English, which some people commented on online. I saw that. But maybe he'll speak some English today.
In nomine Patris et Filii
So they're
et
just starting now.
Spiritus Sancti. Pax vobis. Fratres, agnoscamus peccata nostra, ut aptissimus ad sacra mysteria celebranda.
So Tom, we have the cardinals in the Sistine Chapel for the first Mass under Pope Leo. What's going on the rest of today and in the days to come? Are there any other notable events?
Tomorrow, he's not saying the Mass, but he's supposed to give an address, probably from the window of the Apostolic Palace, like popes do every Sunday. There's the angel after the Angelus prayers. He gives a little address. So that will be the first public address that he gives. It'll be in Italian, and then maybe Spanish, English. We don't know. We will wait and see.
We still don't know if he'll be living in the palace yet, do we?
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I assumed that he spent the night in Casa Santa Marta because that's where everybody was going anyway, and that's where he had a room. But is he going to move into there? It'll be decisive whether he moves into there or not, because that also means if he's there, he's cut off from a lot of other people. He has his visitors are filtered and things like that.
If he's in the palace.
If he's in the palace.
Which is why Francis wanted to
That's why Francis wanted to be in the Casa Santa Marta.
to be with so many people, to be
with people. He's from the Augustinian order. About a third of Catholic priests around the world live in orders rather than being diocesan priests. Usually the priests that we know in parishes are diocesan priests. And those people live together. They live in a community. So maybe he will say, I'm used to living in a community and I want to live in a community. People like, unfortunately, Pope Paul VI, in his diary, he complained bitterly about being cut off and being so lonely in the Apostolic Palace. He was a diocesan priest, and he didn't. At the time, nobody would have insisted on that. Casa Santa Marta didn't even exist, so there was no option for that.
No alternative. So I cut you off earlier. Sorry.
Yeah.
So we're expecting the address from the window of the palace, and then in the coming days, what else is on the agenda?
We don't know. From then on, it's day by day we find out. The people at the Vatican, the journalists accredited to the Vatican, will be told, okay, now today or tomorrow it's so and so.
Yeah, if you check the calendar on the website at Vatican News Daily, There aren't any entries yet.
No. Well, they don't know themselves. So everybody's playing it by ear.
Including us.
Including us, yeah. So that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And he needs to introduce himself, yeah, and get sort of into some sort of rhythm, and we'll just see.
All right. Well, this is, as we've been saying, the first American Pope, Robert Prevost, born in Chicago. Let's take a little bit of a look at his life until now.
He was known as Robert Francis Prevost, a cardinal. He is henceforth to be known as Pope Leo XIV. In his first words as Pope Francis's successor, he emphasized a message of peace, dialogue, and missionary evangelization.
You too help us and help one another to build bridges through dialogue, through encounter, uniting all of us to be one people, always in peace.
Prevost was born in Chicago and is the first pope from the United States. A priest who studied with him decades ago says he believes Leo XIV will be calm, steady, and direct in his guidance to the faithful.
He's not a showboat. He is very calm, but extremely intelligent and extremely compassionate. He's a person who's very sensitive and is concerned to allow everyone to have a voice.
The new pope lived in Peru for years, first as a missionary and then as an archbishop. He is a Peruvian citizen.
The Pope is practically, for me, a sign from God that he is sending someone who will solve the problems of Peru.
As Cardinal, Prevost came to the Vatican in 2023 to serve as the head of the office that vets bishop nominations from around the world. It's one of the most important jobs in the Catholic Church. In January, Pope Francis elevated him into the senior ranks of cardinals, giving him, at 69 years of age, prominence going into the conclave.
Well, as you've been hearing, Prevost was born in Chicago. He earned his bachelor's in mathematics from Villanova University in Pennsylvania, then returned to Chicago to get a diploma in theology from the Catholic Theological Union. He becomes the 267th Pope and the first American one. Flora Marche has more.
In Pope Leo XIV's hometown of Chicago, residents expressed their surprise at the news of his election on Thursday.
I was just on the phone with my grandma, and she said she didn't think she'd live to see a pope from the United States, and I honestly said I didn't think so either.
The president of Chicago's Catholic Theological Union, where Pope Leo XIV studied, also shared her astonishment.
We didn't think that the cardinal electors would lean toward choosing an American. And of course, Pope Leo XIV, as Father John just said, has the heart of a Peruvian as well, has been deeply endeared himself to the church in Latin America.
The auxiliary bishop of Chicago's Catholic Archdiocese said the new pontiff would likely follow the footsteps of the late Pope Francis.
I think that Pope Francis was certainly someone who cared for those who were living on the fringes, who could easily be forgotten. And I strongly...
Well, we're interrupting that report because Mass is beginning. Pope Leo XIV beginning his first Mass as the new pontiff for cardinals at the Sistine Chapel. Let's listen in.
A reading from the book of Revelation. The angel spoke to me, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, And at the gates, 12 angels, and on the gates, the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east, 3 gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. And on the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
Cantate al Signore un canto nuovo.
And again, on set with me is Tom Heneghan, Paris correspondent for the Catholic Weekly, The Tablet. Tom, tell us a little bit about what we just heard.
That was the first reading. It was from the Apocalypse, so it's by John. And what I noticed right away was that there was a woman reading it. Some very traditional Catholics would not even want a woman on the altar. So even having a woman there doesn't say anything about women's ordination or anything, but having a woman on the altar already means he's moderate. He's at least moderate.
Yeah,
so that's good.
An early signal.
An early signal,
right,
yeah.
Right. And before that, we were listening to reactions in America, notably Chicago.
Oh, sure.
About pride. Some people saying they never thought they'd live long enough to see an American pope. You're American.
Yeah.
Did you think you'd be alive to see an American pope?
Only because I read what the Vatican rumors were so much that I began to look into Prevost as a possible one. But even in 2013 or 2005, the 2 conclaves that I covered, the idea was there cannot be an American pope. There can't be a superpower pope. Oh, you could get a lot of conspiracy theories if an American were running the Vatican. And that's gone now. That's passed. And so it was good that taboo has fallen. I don't think he was elected because he was American, but the fact that he is American certainly helped. It broke that taboo, so that was good.
And why did it help?
It helped to break the taboo because I remember the cardinal from Chicago in 2005, Cardinal George. We asked him one day, a bunch of journalists said to him, "Do you think you are papabile?" And he said, "Oh no, there can't be an American pope." It was just ruled out, period, from the start. It was ruled out. Secondly, because he's such an experienced person and has fairly clear views that are counter to those in the White House today, he's somebody who can stand up to him, to Trump.
And that sounds like a political choice. So in the past, it was taboo to have perhaps a pope from a superpower. Now we have a pope that is from a superpower, but is critical of that power.
But he spent more of his life outside of the U.S. than inside the U.S. He didn't really exercise much as a priest in the U.S. at all. It was down in Peru or it was in Rome. So he went back and forth between Peru and Rome with little intervals in Chicago, but very few.
Did you see Donald Trump's reaction to the Pope?
If you were the American president, what would you say? Of course you say it's a great honor, but that doesn't mean that tomorrow he won't say something different.
Do you think the Vatican has already been in touch with the Trump administration, as he said?
No, because I think it's too early. There's just too much else going on. The Pope's schedule is made for him now, and the poor man, he doesn't have much say over that. That's why you get some escapes every now and then. Bergoglio used to go out in his car, incognito, and go around Rome every now and then, just to get out of the Vatican, because it's very, very small. It's the smallest city-state in the world, and his hour-to-hour schedule is often planned out for him. So he doesn't. He used to keep his portable telephone and would give it out to some people who could call him, and sometimes he would make arrangements, and nobody would know about it. Mm-hmm. I don't think Francis would be, Pope Leo would be as independent as that. I think he will go along more with the protocol, but we don't know.
And then all this talk about where a pope is from, how important is that really?
It's less and less important. Before it was important, it was a political question. The Italians had a monopoly, and they, of course, would say, well, he's the Bishop of Rome, isn't he? So it has to be Italian. And Italian is the lingua franca. Inside the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, so many of them learn Italian. It's surprising to see how many people can speak Italian. So it's good that you do speak it. That was one argument that was used. When in Rome. But even elsewhere, I was in Gaza, and I spoke with a priest there, and in my bad Italian, I interviewed a priest there because I don't have any Arabic. And so, but there you go. The other thing is, I think that the rising populism and the rising anti-migrant sentiment in many different countries means that the Pope is seen as a moral voice, and Pope Francis was very explicit about that. He sent a message to the American bishops after J.D. Vance made his mistake and said, in no uncertain terms, you are supposed to respect the dignity of every single person. And if this is not done, it'll end badly. He said that. So it was very clear that he was very much against the position of Trump. He never mentioned Trump, or he never mentioned anybody else in Europe who also they're against the migrants. But it's very clear.
Yes. Pope Leo is set to give his sermon in a moment, but as we've been saying, he was born in Chicago. He's been much of his career in Peru, and for that reason, some people in Latin America are calling him the second pope from Latin America. Take a look.
The bells of Lima's cathedral ring out to welcome Pope Leo XIV. He might have been born in the United States, but Peruvians say he is one of their own.
Celebramos un momento histórico para el Perú y el mundo.
We are celebrating a historic moment for Peru and the world. The Pope is Peruvian. God loves Peru. Long live Pope Leo. Long live Peru.
Just minutes after the Vatican's announcement, celebrations began across the country's capital.
I think he will follow Pope Francis, and he knows the reality of Peru. I believe God said, I'm going to send a pope to repair Peru, and I know he will.
Formerly known as Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, Pope Leo first went to Peru in 1985 and worked in several rural communities. From 2015 until 2023, he served as the Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru's northwest. Just like his predecessor, the late Francis, Pope Leo is expected to work with the poor and has long been an advocate for migrant rights. In Chiclayo, where about 20% of the population lives in poverty, residents remember fondly his work.
Our new pope was a man who worked here, with a low profile, with humility, obedience, great love and tenderness. We want to tell him that as a Chiclayanos and Peruvians, we will continue to pray for him. We love him very much.
While many in the country celebrate, survivor groups have raised concerns about the new pope's handling of 2 cases of alleged sexual abuse from priests in the past.
Yep, and then Prevost called back to the Vatican 2 years ago. Tom, when he left Peru, what did he do once he was back at the Vatican?
When he came to the Vatican, he became what's called the prefect of the dicastery for bishops. That means he was the head of, in secular terms, a government ministry. He was a cabinet minister. And
under Pope Francis.
Right. And the Vatican has very strange ministries sometimes. It's not always the same as government ministries.
And would it have been Francis who appointed him?
Yes, Francis appointed him. And he wanted, because he said this, Prevost said this himself, he wanted somebody who'd been a missionary, who came from an order, who was not part of the Curia. He wanted somebody like himself who would change things.
Someone who had walked the walk?
Walked the walk and talked the talk. And so he came in there, and as prefect of the dicastery, he would meet bishops, archbishops, cardinals who came to Rome, or he would travel out and he would see them. He had, it was as if you have a ministry for governors around the world, governors, or in French terms, you have a ministry for like prefects in each département. So you're bound to meet a lot of people. And so that was another thing in his favor. People already had an idea of what sort of man he was. He's apparently a very good listener, very intelligent, very good listener, and sort of takes on board what people say.
And is that a difficult transition from having spent so much time in Peru to go work in the Vatican and be, cut off from many parts of the world?
I don't know it was difficult for him or not, because it's a normal progression that you end up as a manager of people.
But you sometimes hear about people who do make that transition and they miss.
Yeah, but he seems to have made that transition well, probably because he was already a manager of the Augustinian order, which is much smaller, but they're active in about 50 different countries around the world. So he had to deal with them and dealt with them quite well, apparently. So he just went up and up and up the ladder.
And now here he is set to give his first sermon to cardinals at the Sistine Chapel. That's what we're seeing on our...
First he'll read the gospel.
Yes.
Or somebody else may read the gospel, I don't know.
Right. And so then he was the head of the dicastery. And what does that entail, the sort of daily work as that sort of ministerial position, as you mentioned?
Yeah. When a bishop or archbishop resigns or dies or whatever, and a new one has to be named, the papal nuncio, the papal ambassador in that country, sends 3 names to the Vatican, and it's the Vatican who picks it.
Tom, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're going to listen in to Pope Leo right now.
Not just with me, but with all of us, my brother cardinals.
In English.
As we celebrate this morning, I invite you to recognize the marvels that the Lord has done, the blessings that the Lord continues to pour out upon all of us. Through the ministry of Peter, you have called me to carry that cross and to be blessed with that mission. And I know I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me as we continue as a church, as a community of friends of Jesus, as believers, to announce the good news, to announce the gospel. To say, il Cristo, il Figlio del Dio vivente. Con queste parole, Pietro, interrogato dal Maestro,
with these words,
assieme agli altri discepoli,
Peter, asked by the Master, together with his other disciples, about his faith in him, expresses the patrimony that the Church, through the apostolic succession, has preserved, deepened, and handed for over 2,000 years. Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, the only Savior, who alone reveals the face of the Father. In him, God, in order to make himself close and accessible to men and women, revealed himself to us in the trusting eyes of a child, in the lively mind of a young person, and in the mature features of a man, finally appearing to the disciples after the resurrection with his glorious body. He thus showed us a model of human holiness that we can all imitate, together with the promise of an eternal destiny that transcends all limits and abilities. Peter, in his response, understands both these things, the gift of God and the path to follow in order to allow himself to be changed by the gift. There are two inseparable aspects of salvation entrusted to the Church to be proclaimed for the good of the human race. Indeed, they are entrusted to us who were chosen by Him before we were formed in our mother's womb, reborn in the waters of baptism, and surpassing our limits, and with no merit of our own, brought here and sent forth from here, so that the gospel may be proclaimed to every creature. In particular, God has called me by your election to succeed the Prince of the Apostles, and has entrusted this treasure to me so that with his help I may be his faithful administrator for the sake of the entire mystical body of the Church. He has done so in order that she may be ever more fully a city set on a hill, an ark of salvation, sailing from the waters of the history, and a beacon that illumines the dark nights. And this not so much through the magnificence of structures of grandeur, like these monuments among whom we find ourselves. Rather, he did this holiness for her members, for we are the people whom God has chosen as his own, so that we may declare the wonderful deeds of him who called us out of darkness. Peter, however, makes his profession of faith in his reply with a specific question. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Jesus asks. The question is not insignificant. It concerns an essential aspect of our ministry, namely the world in which we live with its limitations and its potential, its questions, and its convictions. Who do people say the Son of Man is? If we reflect on the scene that we are considering, we might find two possible answers which characterize two different attitudes. First, there is the world's response. Matthew tells us that this conversation between Jesus and his disciples takes place in the beautiful town of Caesarea Philippi, filled with luxurious palaces, set on a magnificent natural landscape at the foot of Mount Hermon. But it was also a place of cruel power plays and the scene of betrayals and infidelity. This setting speaks us of a world that considers Jesus as completely insignificant. At best, a person with unusual, striking ways of speaking and acting. And so, once his presence becomes irksome because of his demands for honesty and his stern moral requirements, this world will not hesitate to reject and eliminate him. Then there is the other possible response to Jesus' question, that of the ordinary people. For them, the Nazarene is not a charlatan, but an upright man, one who has courage, one who speaks well and says the right things, like other prophets in the history of Israel. That is why they follow him, at least for as long as they can do so without too much risk of inconvenience. Yet, to them, he is only a man, and therefore, in times of danger, during his passion, they too abandon him and depart disappointed. What is striking about these two attitudes is their relevance today. They embody motions that we could easily find on the lips of many men and women in our own time. Even if while essentially identical, they are expressed in different languages. Even today, there are many settings in which the Christian faith is considered absurd, meant for the weak and unintelligent. Settings where other securities are preferred, like technology, money, success, power, or pleasure. These are contexts where it is not easy to preach the gospel and bear witness to its truth, where believers are mocked, opposed, despised, or at best tolerated and pitied. Yet, precisely for these reasons, they are the places where our missionary outreach is desperately needed. A lack of faith is often tragically accompanied by the loss of meaning in life, the neglect of mercy, appalling violation of human dignity, the crisis of the family, and so many other wounds that afflict our society. And these are not few. Today, there are also many settings which Jesus, although appreciated as a man, is reduced to a kind of a charismatic leader or a superman. This is true not only among believers, but also among many baptized Christians who thus end up living at this level in a state of practical atheism. This is the world that has been entrusted to us, a world in which Pope Francis taught us so many times we are called to bear witness to our joyful faith in Jesus, our Savior. Therefore, it is essential that we too repeat with Peter, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." It is essential to do this, first of all, in our personal relationship with the Lord, in our commitment to a daily journey of conversion, therefore, to do so as a church, experiencing together our fidelity to the Lord and bringing the good news to all. I say this, first of all, to myself, as the successor of Peter, as I begin my mission as Bishop of Rome, and called in charity to the Universal Church, according to a well-known expression of St. Ignatius of Antioch, and called to preside in charity over the Universal Church. St. Ignatius, who was led in chains to the city, the place of impending sacrifice, wrote to the Christians, "Then I will truly be a disciple of Jesus when the world no longer sees my body." Ignatius was speaking about being devoured by the wild beasts in the arena, and so it happened. But these words applied more generally to an indispensable commitment to all those in the Church who exercise a ministry of authority. It is the move aside so that Christ may remain, that we may make oneself small and he may be known and glorified, to spend oneself to the utmost so that all may have the opportunity to know and love him. May God grant me this grace today and always throughout the loving intercession of Mary, Mother of the Church.
And that was the first public homily of our new Pope Leo XIV as Pope. And we continue with the Holy Mass. And universal prayer.
Well, that was Pope Leo XIV delivering his first Mass before cardinals at the Sistine Chapel. He began with a quick statement in English saying, "You have called me to carry the cross and to be blessed." He then said the Catholic Church should identify itself through the holiness of its members and not through the grandeur of her buildings. He also deplored what he called a lack of faith amid a pursuit of power and pleasure. Joining me on the set is Tom Heneghan, Paris correspondent for the Catholic Weekly, The Tablet. Tom, your main takeaways from that first sermon we heard from Pope Leo XIV?
It was, on the one hand, a very normal sort of sermon, but on the other hand, there were echoes of Pope Francis in there that I found very interesting. You mentioned, for example, when he's talked about the different temptations that the modern world presents, and he's talked about either technology, money, success, or pleasure, things like that. He said, well, we're told to limit our interest in that, and we think of other things. He also said he quoted Pope Francis as saying, we are called to bear witness in this world. So he's very aware of what is happening around him and the fact that the church has to respond to it somehow. Now, he didn't really give any solutions, but he immediately said, if we have to respond to that, that means we're looking outward. Francis was, before he was elected Pope, gave an important short speech where he said the church had to look outward and look at the world around it, which was not really the case beforehand, or not as much.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing so far, he's not outspoken. He may not be direct, but he's not avoiding this. But he is subtle. His style is subtle.
Yeah, his style is more subtle than Pope Francis, but he identified some of the problems in a very vague way and said, we have to bear witness. And that's important because that means we have to speak up when we think differently from the way things are happening. If we have a criticism, we have to say it.
And is the intended audience here the cardinals? Is it the faithful around the world, or is it this message to someone else?
He's speaking first of all to the cardinals, because the cardinals will be listening and they will hear every single little hint that he puts out there, because they will then, when they go back to their countries, they will be asked, what did he have to say? What's he going to do?
How does that affect us?
Yeah. And so he didn't give much away, but he did say more or less the same thing he was saying yesterday, that he was in Francis' footsteps. He will be a bit more reserved about it, but he won't be afraid. He won't be cowed by somebody. If he wants to speak up and say, no, you're wrong, he'll do that.
Any other interesting takeaways you had from what he said, or the choices of the words he used?
In the beginning, he spoke about the missionary work of cardinals, bishops, archbishops, etc. That's interesting too, because his background is as a missionary, and he comes to this not as an enforcer of a set of rules, which many previous popes were, but as a missionary who says, I invite you to take a look at this. I invite you to think about this. And he said, he even criticized some baptized Catholics who take a very lackadaisical sort of approach to that and say, no, you have to be more missionary yourself. Even us, everybody has to be involved in spreading the gospel. So it was in a one hand vague, on the other hand very specific.
Yes, and subtle throughout, I think we can say. Tom?
Subtle, yeah. He's not going to shoot his mouth off like sometimes Pope Francis did.
But we have to wait to see what happened on Media Day in the coming future.
Yeah. Maybe in 5-6 months we'll say differently, but
find out.
At the moment, he's being a bit reserved.
And you'll be here to help us break it down. Yeah. Tom Heneghan, thank you very much. Tom Heneghan, parish correspondent for the Catholic Weekly, The Tablet. That brings us to the end of this special coverage of Pope Leo XIV's first Mass at the Sistine Chapel. Thank you for watching. More news coming